Giants appear frequently not only in folklore, but in alternate history as well. You'll hear of people saying giants lived alongside us at some point. Others say we descended from them. At the end of the day, anything larger than life appearing right before you in the wilderness would flip your whole world upside down. This is a memory I try to keep pushed down. It's not something I like to think about because it's unsettling and confusing, but it is very real. It was 2011. I was very psyched that weekend for a campout. I had joined the Cub Scouts that year, and this would be my first time camping with the troop. Mom got me a brand new sleeping bag, and Dad bought me a cool new flashlight that strapped to my head. I spent weeks before the trip planning what snacks and other things to bring, imagining all the fun I would have with my new friends. When Friday finally rolled around, I was bursting with excitement. Mom drove me to the meeting spot and helped me haul my overstuffed backpack to the gathering area. I gave her a quick hug goodbye before running off to join my din. We all were cracking up, laughing, and joking around while the scout leaders did one final backpack check to make sure we had the essentials. After what felt like ages, the scoutmasters rounded all of us up, leading us to the buses that would be taking us into the mountains to the camp. I plopped down next to my best friend, Simon. We played card games to pass the time during the bumpy bus ride. We were both new to scouting that year and had hit it off right away with our shared obsession of crawling through the massive drainage pipes around our neighborhood. After an hour or so, the buses lumbered up the narrow, winding driveway of the lakeside camp. Simon and I pressed our faces against the grimy windows, oohing and awing over the thick forests and wild hills surrounding the camp. The buses squealed to a stop, and we bounced out, heading straight to the campsites where we'd be picking spots and setting up tents. Simon and I scored a prime area right next to the main trail which led to the latrines, close enough to the counselor tents that we hopefully wouldn't get in trouble for some late-night giggling. We helped each other assemble our simple A-frame tents, struggling a bit to get the flexible poles correctly seated. With our camp fully set up, the real fun could start. We did our first activity rotation that evening, which was archery. After that was rowboating and climbing the towering rock wall. Well, Sam climbed the wall. I belayed him from below, too nervous to go past the halfway point. By the time we got back, the sun was setting and the scout leaders were getting the bonfire ready. We gobbled down the delicious, hearty stew the camp cooks had prepared, then ran around the field, burning off some steam before the fire. The flames were really roaring when the scouts finally gathered and arranged around the burning logs. I'll always remember how mystical that scene was. Shadows dancing against the dark woods behind us. Millions of stars twinkling overhead in the mountain sky. One of the scoutmasters officially kicked off the campfire by going over safety rules, but I could barely focus. I just wanted those scary stories to be told. I had no place to start. After the typical songs and skits, the camp counselor leading the event invited anyone to share local legends or ghost stories about the area. A bunch of the older scouts told some creepy tales about haunted cabins, bloody battlefields, campers being watched from the woods at night. I knew they were just stories, but I found myself getting freaked out anyway. I saw a man named Randy Calvin, one of the older scoutmasters, ambled up with a mischievous sparkle in his eye. I figured he was just going to tell some story to try and get a scare out of us kids, but what he said always stuck with me. Calvin warned us that the camp got its fair share of strange, unexplained events from deep in the forest. He described hearing horrible booming crashes in the middle of the night and clear evenings. The thunderous sound echoed off the mountaintops, making it impossible for Calvin to track down the source. He swore it was too rhythmic and extended to be collapsing trees or rocks, almost like giant, heavy footsteps pounding down from the peaks above. Most of us scouts laughed it off, making jokes about Calvin trying to scare us, but something about the intense look on his face as he told the story made me feel ice cold, even next to the towering bonfire. Another scout leader quickly lightened the mood with a funny skit, but I still felt jittery and on edge when Simon and I eventually headed to our tents. I wriggled into my cozy new sleeping bag, but I couldn't relax. Even with Simon's gossiping whispers distracting me from the scary story, I felt super aware of each little night noise around us. The wind hissing through branches, raindrops pattering on the tent, owls calling in the dark, all put me more and more on edge. Exhausted from the full day of activities, I must have drifted off eventually. Sometime deep in the night, I startled awake for no clear reason. I groggily wondered if I had dreamed something disturbing and was about to sink back to sleep when an earth-shaking boom roared in the distance. I shot upright, heart racing as my mind struggled to place the horrible crashing sound. Had a tree fallen right next to our tents? My heart was hammering as I fumbled to turn on my flashlight. The narrow beam pierced through the darkness of my tent. I scanned the cramped space quickly, then peered outside. No fallen trees, no rubble in sight. What's happening? Simon mumbled from his tent, voice slurred with sleep. Another earth-rumbling boom echoed from somewhere out in the woods, seemingly even closer this time. The plastic tent walls rippled with the force of it. I don't know, man, I whispered back. Remember that story Calvin told about the weird booming noises out here? Do you think? I trailed off. I crawled back into my tent, feeling goosebumps rise on my arms that had nothing to do with the cold night air leaking through the cheap tent. Simon and I lay frozen in our spots for a moment, listening intently past the usual forest sounds. The silence stretched on, and I began to wonder if I'd imagined the bellowing crashes when an ear-splitting crack cut through the quiet. I swear I could almost feel the vibrations through the hard ground beneath me that time. We should check on the others, make sure everyone's okay, Simon suggested, his voice higher-pitched than usual. I really didn't want to go out into that unnatural darkness just yet, but curiosity yanked at me. We finally motivated ourselves enough to scramble out of our cozy sleeping bags, gingerly stepping out of the tent flaps. Most of the other scouts were still snoozing peacefully in their little tents, but we spotted a small group of kids standing in a tense huddle near the counselor tents. As we hurried over, strained whispers reached my ears. Don't know what's going on. Could just be rock slides further in the valley echoing. The last one was way closer, bro. What if it's that monster Calvin was? I awkwardly joined the ring of wide-eyed scouts. A few claimed to have heard the night's first deafening crack from within their tents. Others were awakened only by the second closer boom. Either way, none of us had a clue about the origin of those sanity-questioning sounds. After some time of frenzied speculation, the noises faded out for good. The counselors eventually convinced everyone to go back to bed, using logical explanations about loose rock falls. But their calming words still couldn't fully drown out Calvin's chilling campfire story, which rang in our heads. I lay awake long after Simon's muffled snores filled the air once more. Those rhythmic, almost footstep-sounding noises reverberated through my memory on repeat. As much as I tried to convince myself of the rockslide explanation, like the scoutmasters, some deep gut instinct kept me on edge. The next day, all the scouts buzzed about the odd midnight disturbances over breakfast, comparing stories and theories. But outdoor time waits for no one. Soon we were all distracted, splashing down the frigid lake during the polar bear swimming, or focused, owning our slingshot skills. By nightfall, though, creepy theories came creeping back as shadows stretched over our camp. That evening's activities ended after dinner, with 2 hours of free roam before lights out. We could hang out at the dining tables or tents if we wanted, but Simon, another friend named Tyler, and I had an even better idea: a secret mission into the shadowy forest trails. During the day, older scouts like us were allowed to wander the winding dirt hiking paths if we stayed in earshot. We figured under cover of darkness, we might spot clues as to the previous night's ruckus, or at least have some fun, spooking each other while searching for that mythical forest monster. Tyler ran off to grab flashlights for him and Simon, while Simon and I stuffed our pockets with snacks. I made sure my handy head-mounted flashlight was in working order. We then met up just inside the tree line, trying and failing to seem casual about breaking the rules. My heart sped up with nerves and excitement as we left the last pool of light from the counselor's pit. Our beams bounced erratically off trunks and shrubs as we pushed further down the narrow path. I heard Simon gulp loudly next to me when an owl pierced the night with its eerie hooting. Stray branches scratched faintly against our jackets, making us all twitch with building apprehension. You really think those booms could have been the monster Calvin told us about? Tyler suddenly whispered. He swung his flashlight manically from side to side as we walked, as if he feared something was about to leap from the brush. I mean, he seemed totally serious when he talked about it, I murmured back after a few silent seconds. And the timing was weird. Tyler gulped again but kept scanning the close forest with jerky movements. I was about to reach out to him to help him settle down when he abruptly stiffened. "Guys, are you feeling kind of sick too?" Tyler asked with a definite quiver in his voice. He wrapped an arm across his stomach and hunched forward. "Sick?" Simon questioned at the same moment I blurted out, "What's wrong?" "I don't know, man. My stomach just suddenly feels messed up and I'm getting all sweaty." Tyler continued stumbling forward, but his pasty, grimacing face honestly concerned me. Simon pressed a steadying hand to our friend's shoulder. "Hey, no worries, buddy. David can keep going and say hi to that monster for us if he wants. But let's me and you head back to the counselors and get you checked out." I felt torn watching Tyler struggle to nod in agreement. I didn't want to abandon what was supposed to be an intrepid trio adventure, but Tyler clearly wasn't up for pressing onward into the eerie night. A feeling of curiosity and exploration got the better of me. "Yeah, I'll keep going for a bit if that's all right." "I hope you feel better, dude," I offered supportively. Tyler attempted a pained smile over his shoulder before Simon led him carefully back up the trail. Just like that, I stood alone as their shuffling footsteps faded away. I see doubt trickle down my neck for the first time that night. The surrounding woods seemed even more silent, more ominous without my friend's company. I couldn't even hear distant camp chatter anymore above the rustling leaves. Still, I reminded myself I was not that deep into the woods yet. No point turning back from my first solo night hike over random creeks and hoots. Adjusting my jacket tighter against the chill breeze, I repositioned my head-mounted flashlight and continued down the narrow dirt trail. Crunching leaves and snapping twigs marked my cautious steps into denser forest. The path remained fairly level, with some exposed roots to step over carefully. I used my flashlight more judiciously now that I was solo, trying my best to preserve battery, reducing my chances of spooking wildlife. Still, I paused periodically to sweep my dimming beam across the impenetrable woods around me. During one sweeping scan, I caught a flicker of movement off to my left. My heart was suddenly thunderous. I backtracked my light along a row of tangled bushes. I could make out a pale column rising up from behind the shrubbery, so smooth it almost glowed in the darkness. My breath caught when I realized my light filtered straight through the shape in places, almost like Swiss cheese holes, hardly daring to breathe. I crept off the trail toward the odd formation, barely visible through the bushes. It must be a decaying birch tree, I told myself, firmly battling against icy unease. Still, I had never spotted white bark textured quite like that before. Just as I craned my neck to direct my fading beam at this holy trunk, an earth-shattering crash exploded behind me. I spun in sheer terror, fumbling to not fall over. Had a nearby tree just split and crashed down impossibly close? My weak light finally steadied on the trail I'd left moments before, but instead of a shattered maple or oak now blocking the path, I saw another pale pillar had now risen up in the middle of the dirt trail. How is that possible, I wondered. My heart seizing, I gaped upwards as the smooth column lifted off the ground, rising further and further. I turned to run, now facing that first object I saw, which I thought was a decaying birch tree, only to see it disappear above me, rising off the ground in much the same way. I ran off to the side, ducking behind a mossy boulder twice my size, clinging desperately as my mind reeled. Those column-like things, they had moved, rising up like freakish legs. Then another soul-shaking thud pounded through the darkness, followed by an earth-quaking crash even heavier than the previous two. This time I turned my flashlight upward in stunned realization. The rhythmic sequence lined up perfectly with Calvin's description of booming footsteps and crashing echoes. But that would mean... My heart stuttered to comprehend the pale legs must belong to some towering creature shrouded in night and forest canopy. I mindlessly sat there, trembling behind my protective rock, hearing the colossal footsteps fade steadily into the mountains. No other noise disturbed the deathly silence that night except my ragged breathing. No scouts came searching for me when I didn't return from the bathroom trip we had used as our hiking excuse. For 2 hours, pure primal fear pinned me in place until another scout's distant voice finally echoed down the trail, signaling that free roam had ended. On autopilot, I stumbled those shadowy couple of miles back to camp. I was reprimanded for coming back late, for hiking out too far. That night I hardly slept between paralyzing waves of confusion and wonder at what I'd watched walking through those woods. Over a decade later, I still shudder remembering that pale, towering leg lifting from forest shadows. Whatever had wandered down from untamed wilderness so close to our little scout camp defied all rational understanding. Whenever these scoutmasters organized return trips to the camp, I always refused to go back, making up various excuses, wary of what those dark mountain forests conceal. But I'm also quite tempted by the question that has haunted me all these years. What would happen if I returned to those haunted trails with proper gear? Could I finally get a glimpse of the rest of that huge, wandering thing hidden in the darkness and canopy? I've been lucky enough to have witnessed a great many things in the woods, lakes, and mountains of the Poconos. I've spent my entire life out here, and the fairer weather usually has me itching to go fishing with my stepdaughter, or taking my dog on a hike, maybe even putting my kayak on the lake for some sketchy bass fishing before a thunderstorm. Many people try to get 5 more minutes in bed. I'm trying to get 1 more cast in. That being said, it wasn't like that when I was a kid. Hunting was more than a pastime in my family. I grew up with very little money, so hunting was a way to fill the freezer, even if you did have to freeze and be bored doing it. My father and I had just parked his S10 at our friend's house in Goldsboro. I was around 12 years old back then. This was my first year carrying a rifle myself. I was excited, but not enough to prevent me from sleeping at 4 a.m. on the ride there. So exactly where we went, I'm not sure. Our buddy had just moved there and his trailer was situated on the edge of a private forest, which his landlord gave us all permission to hunt on. They, the adults, were psyched. I just wanted to read my Harry Potter book already. We walked for what felt like forever. I'm not sure how long it was, but I was in a hurry to sit down, eat my Pop-Tarts, and read. So my father placed me in a section of open pine forest. It was heavily wooded there, but had ample clearings for taking good shots. My dad was the kind of guy who, when he put you somewhere to stand, you'd better stay there. It was barely dawn when he disappeared into the fog that had begun to roll in. I had decided to make the best of it. I cleared brush away to be as quiet as possible while sitting and got my breakfast ready. I was enjoying this fine cuisine of powder-made hot chocolate and strawberry Pop-Tarts. I had just finished a chapter in my book when I finished my food. The fog had fully rolled in now, and a light breeze had picked up. I only remember this because of the following events. I was reading the second book, The Chamber of Secrets. It felt like I was there for days under that tree, and I decided to hunt by sound, code for closing my eyes and taking a nap in case my dad caught me. And that's when everything really started. It started off soft, leaves being kicked up, or at least the sound of leaves. My eyes flew open, and adrenaline hit me. I was 12 years old. The images of Bambi's dad flooded my mind. I was pumped. Branches and twigs began to snap in the distance, but it was so foggy I couldn't see past 40 yards. The noises died down ahead of me and out of sight. I cursed under my breath. The breeze must have carried my scent because the sounds were going around me. I quietly stood up, grabbing my rifle, ready to use it. I knew something was close and it had to come into view sooner or later. My dad would crap his pants if I got the biggest buck of the year. But the woods were quiet. No birds, no wind, nothing now. I would later learn in life that that is not a good sign. At the moment, I was elated because I could hear better than I could see, and this gave me an advantage, or so I thought. The steps were walking in a wide arc around me now. I had guessed that Bambi smelled my Pop-Tarts and was trying to find them. The noises of movement, brush moving and twig snapping, ended in front of me where they began. I was impatiently waiting for my first trophy buck when I saw the outline of a man walking through the fog. I thought my dad had come to get me and just couldn't see through the fog and had gotten turned around. I was happy yet mad at the same time as I lost sight of him and began to pack up. But he reappeared moments later, peering out from behind a tree. He reached up to steady himself on an overhead branch as he looked at me. Then my senses caught up to me. If that was my dad, why wasn't he wearing orange? Where was his rifle? And why was he so dark? Panic set in. I loved to read, and I loved the 000 section at the library. Stories of Bigfoot began to flood my mind. As hysteria set in, I let out a blood-curdling scream as a hand came down on my shoulder. It was my father, who now looked as surprised as me. I quickly told him about the man in the fog and how he had watched me and kept walking around me. If fudge around and find out we're a person, that was my dad. At the prospect of some man watching me in the woods, he went right to the tree where I'd last seen him. He had his 30-06 trained on the tree. My dad quickly disappeared behind the giant pine before reappearing. "Nobody here," he yelled out as the blood ran cold in my veins. The branch the man had grabbed above him as he peered out to look at me was 12 feet off the ground. I told this to my dad, pleading with him to take me home, and we did leave, only because of the weather. He tried to convince me of black bears walking on 2 legs, but my time at the library told me what I'd seen. That was the first time I ever encountered what everyone calls Bigfoot. I don't scare easy. When you work the night shift as a security guard in a factory outside of Bogota, you get used to creepy noises and things that go bump when everyone else is sleeping. But that rain-soaked drive home through the Andes still haunts me years later. The overnight supervisor had asked me to stay late that Tuesday to help prep for an inspection. By the time I clocked out, a thunderstorm was brewing over the mountains, making the winding forest road home look even darker than usual. I pulled my jacket on tight and headed to the parking lot as the first fat raindrops splattered around me. My rattle-trap truck roared to life, and I squinted through sheets of rainfall now pelting the windshield. Even with wipers on full blast, visibility was terrible between the storm and the wind. Visibility was terrible between the storm and lack of guardrails on the narrow mountain passes, but going back to crash in the break room for the night was not an option either. Still 40 minutes from home in my tiny village, I white-knuckled the steering wheel and leaned forward, straining to make out the cliffside road through the downpour. Lightning suddenly forked through the clouds, illuminating the forest for miles with electric white light. Blinking to clear the purple blotches from my vision, something shifting in the trees nearby caught my eye in that split-second flash. The flashes of lightning carved shadows along every dripping branch and frond, so making out distinct shapes was impossible. Still, a nagging unease crept up my shoulders. That lurching movement off the road seemed way too big to be a deer or a stray cow. I was wondering about what I might have imagined seeing when the next ear-splitting crack and flash came. This time, there was no denying the silhouetted mass slowly crawling between wide tree trunks ahead, deep in the forest. I could make out spindly jointed legs rippling slowly forward, braced against the huge dark sphere of its body, suspended off the rain-slicked earth by a good 10 to 15 feet. I slammed the brakes instinctively before my brain could even process that the thing emerging from the lightning-cast shadows had to be the size of a delivery truck. If not bigger, maybe more like the huge tractor trailers that hauled produce through our little village into the capital. This creature creeping between 2,000-year-old trees in the night used its numerous barbed legs alone to carry its freakish bulk quietly through the underbrush. The brakes screeched in protest. I shoved my idling truck into reverse then, right as brilliant veins of light again clawed through the churning clouds. Dread leapt into my throat as the momentary flash spotlighted the swollen abdomen I'd glimpsed before, now yards closer to the forest's edge. 8 hideous eyes ringed the hairy mass which had tipped forward as if tasting the storm-charged air. Impossibly long pointed limbs shifted slowly, getting closer with a trampling grace no truck-sized being should possess. I was panicking then. I craned my neck to peer desperately behind me as the most recent break of lightning faded and darkness returned. I'd realized then I had turned off the headlights, and I didn't dare turn them back on because if I did, I would fully expose that thing in the woods. I slammed it back into drive and I roared almost blind down the twisting pass, praying as I never had before to arrive home intact. I only turned on the headlights when I knew I was safe. By then I was gulping down huge breaths again. Back home I was fumbling my keys, shaking so hard trying to unlock my door. When I saw my wife, I couldn't force out more than a horrified whisper. I had no idea how to even start describing what I saw, but I did my best after calming down, and luckily she believed me. We moved to the city not long after, and I refused any job which would require me to drive along that road again. Every now and then on stormy nights, my mind still traces patterns of a shriveling shadow sliding stealthily between ancient tree trunks on 8 crooked legs braced to charge. Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember to stay safe out there because this world is full of strange and terrifying things. If you like and enjoyed these stories, then hit the like button, press the notification bell, and subscribe for more spine-tingling content. And we will see you in the next story.